Bettina Arndt, thank you so much for coming on Northern Vibe. This is so cool. I've been so looking forward to talking to you, and I know the viewers are going to love every second of it.
Oh, well, I hope they do. Some of them may not.
Well, actually, I can say with confidence that a lot of them will, because like I've spoken to some full-on feminists. This magnificent lady whose pen name is Edie Wyatt. Her real name is Christine Chenade.
Yeah.
And I said this to her because right after I interviewed Janice Fiamenko, who is a Canadian.
Yeah, I know Janice very well. Yeah.
Oh, she's magnificent.
Yeah.
Absolutely magnificent. And I said to Christine afterwards, because she was like, there was a few burning comments during the interview, which was really cool, actually. You know, polite, but very passionate. And at the end, I contacted her and I said, you know, you got more in common with her than you know, because fundamentally, you're both very decent people, driven by a view of goodness, a view of decency. You're both trying to compensate for a group of people that you believe are being discriminated against. And really, you're trying to get to the bottom of what is a serious, complicated issue and something that as a community, we're going to have to do. Mm. And Chris was like, well, I see your point, but I've got nothing else in common with it. And like, you know, like she was kind of tribal, but yeah. I suspect that the same thing will happen with this. So yeah, no, look, I mean, yes, hopefully this will engage people, and yes, hopefully a few buttons will be pressed, but I think you're more popular than you think. And I think that—
Oh, I'm huge. Look, I know, I go into a supermarket, I get men and women of all ages coming up to me. I know I've got a very solid fan base out there. But, you know, because I've been beaten up recently publicly, they're very nervous. I get very little public, you know, support in public. But out in the community, I've got enormous support. I know that.
What I'd really like to discuss is, because I know that people are going to say, well, you know, let's find out what really motivates, you know, intelligent, erudite woman, but you're in a fight where you have no skin in the game and you're copping hits. So what's going on? Why are you doing this?
Well, I probably should go back. I mean, I started my career nearly 50 years ago, working for women. I mean, I was very excited at the idea of doing something to help women. I was a young graduate, as you mentioned, in clinical psychology, and went out there thinking I would work to improve the sex lives of Australian women. What a good goal. And that was in the 1970s, when sex was a very taboo area and we weren't allowed to talk about it publicly. And I'd actually done this thesis on teaching women to reach orgasm. And what was painfully obvious, I talked to all these women over a long, you know, 6-month period, and discovered the biggest problem was ignorance, because women had very little idea about their own bodies. They hadn't been taught anything about, you know, what it takes for a woman to respond. And it just seemed pretty stupid to sit there with woman after woman saying, this is your clitoris, you know, you need to know about this. So I, right from the beginning, had this idea it'd be good to get out in the community and talk about this through the media. But I started off briefly working as a therapist and joined this adult sex education magazine called Forum. And that was designed to give people information about sex. And we had a whole bunch of experts to answer people's sexual problems and so on. And I worked in a clinic for only really less than a year doing therapy. But after that, my whole career was then in the media from then on. So I didn't practice as a psychologist beyond that. I mean, there's one of the areas I've been under attack in the last few years is this idea that I'm not really a psychologist. I never registered to be a psychologist because at the time I graduated, you didn't have to register. There was no such thing. And it's a real question, you know. Do you know who Norman Swan is? The doctor who was very on the ABC, very prominent expert on COVID the last few years, etc. And he he's often referred to as a doctor, but he hasn't practiced for a similar length of time than I've been out in my career. I mean, it's a real question, is if you train at something, can you be referred to as a psychologist and so on? And my enemies, who are many, have been reporting me to the health authorities for the last few years, saying she's misrepresenting herself. The health authorities always end up deciding I've done nothing wrong, but they constantly slightly change the goalposts. And so now they say I should just talk about what my degrees were, that I had a Master of Clinical Psychology. You know, I'm not allowed to call myself a psychologist. Well, that's fine, because I'm not interested in that. Anyway, that's how it all began. I started work as a sex therapist, then spent 10 wonderful years talking about sex on the media, talking on television and radio. I had a talkback show. I answered people's sexual problems. It was just amazing. And I was only, I started off as a 23-year-old. It was a great career and really good fun. And I mean, I still run into people who say, you taught me everything I know. It's really funny. And I also got very involved in education. I was teaching medical students all around Australia, regular lecturer at universities in Sydney, teaching social workers and psychologists, everyone, because there was this awakening of realization that people in the professions needed to know more about sex, and something I really enjoyed doing. So that was the beginning. And I was working, as I said, mainly for women, but inevitably men started to talk to me. And if men talk to you about their erections, they'll tell you everything, and so they talk about other aspects of their lives as well, so I would learn about all the other things that were troubling them. And I learned a lot. I started to think what it's like to be on the other side of the fence, what it's like to be a man whose marriage breaks up and you can't get to see your kids, all the issues that are really affecting men in our society. And gradually, so after about 10 years, I ended up, I was running the magazine when my husband, he died. I was widowed and had to sort of start again. We closed the magazine and I went out and started writing for some of our big publications. And I wrote about gender issues, more and more from the male perspective. And what's interesting, looking back on all of that, I mean, I look back and I think one of the things that attracted me about sex is you weren't allowed to talk about it, which is like a moth to the flame. I can't resist things that you're not allowed to talk about. And then ever since, I've been talking about men, because the whole cultural narrative, our society became absolutely dominated by women's needs and women's wants. And I mean, the whole social debate, discussion, dialogue, of course, mainly in the newspapers and so on around social issues, is run by women. And they're always telling us everything that women don't have and need and want. And no one ever talked about men. It was a one-way discussion. And so I got out there and started to say, well, this is what men are telling me on any number of issues, from family law through to suicide. Look at it, figures now. 6 out of every 8 people who kill themselves in Australia are male. We have a gender-neutral suicide policy where 4 of the 5 recipients of those programs are women. Why? How is that possible? How is it that all our government money is going to general programs that mainly benefit women, and no one talks about what's happening to males and why they're killing themselves? I mean, there was issue after issue that just made me absolutely hopping mad about the distorted public discussion. And so I've got more and more caught up in debating and talking about the truth about some of these difficult issues, domestic violence and sexual assault, and where we often hear a very distorted view of what's actually going on. And I got totally fed up with the male bashing that's been going on in our society for 40 years, where inevitably it's always men doing something wrong. And we never hear about the good things about men. We never celebrate men. Anyway, that's how it all happened. There's no question I was really getting somewhere in the last few years. And I became very dangerous because there's a group of women, particularly, and some men in our society who are determined to control the debate. And they don't like it when anybody challenges them. And one of the areas I really went out and started to try to encourage a proper discussion was looking at what's happening on our university campuses. That's my baby, if you like, the thing that's consumed me for the last few years. Because we had this totally manufactured narrative that there was a rape crisis on our campuses, which was total rubbish. They made up these statistics and they claimed there was this huge crisis on our campuses. And they actually persuaded, we've got this Human Rights Commission, big commission. They spend $1 million of our money on a survey trying to prove, this was 4 or 5 years ago, trying to prove there was a rape crisis on our campus. And they came up with 0.8% of students said they'd had any sort of experience of sexual assault, which included being groped by a stranger on the train to uni. It wasn't what we would normally think of as being raped on campus. It included this very wide definition of rape. And so 0.8%. Now, obviously, any rape is one too many.
Absolutely.
We all acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But they didn't have a rape crisis. I wrote an article saying we should be celebrating our safe universities. Yeah. And I was the only journalist in Australia to tell the truth about that survey. And what they found was a lot of unwanted staring, which was low-grade harassment, women not liking the way men look at them. And they presented this as this crisis of sexual violence. So I decided to go out on Australian campuses, this was about 4 years ago, and do a tour of Australian campuses and say, what is going on here? Why are we allowing our universities to get sucked into this rubbish? Because what was happening then was the activists had persuaded our universities to set up kangaroo courts. We have a criminal law system to adjudicate this very serious crime of rape. And the university decided, it's the most fascinating story. The universities decided they wanted to do it themselves. And do you know why? Because they don't feel enough men are being convicted of rape. And this all started, funnily enough, with Joe Biden back in America, was vice president under Obama. And he decided that there weren't enough rape convictions, because the problem is most rape cases actually involve kids. People under 25, young people. Often they're people who are dating or hook up or casual relationship. And if you end up in front of a jury, most juries won't send a young man to prison for 7 or 10 years when it's a he and his versus her, her word case, where they don't know who to believe. And so those cases tend to fall down in court. And so what Joe Biden decided to do was set up kangaroo courts on American universities, require universities to do this, where they lowered the standard proof, balance of probabilities. Oh, well, yeah, maybe he did, maybe he won't. Well, never mind, we'll still chuck the kid out of university. We'll believe the victim, which means believe the woman. We won't allow him any access to illegal protection. We'll deny him all his normal legal rights, and we'll convict him. And so in America, it's had hundreds and hundreds of cases of male students being thrown off campus by these kangaroo courts. And exactly the same thing happened here. We set up an apparatus on all Australian universities to adjudicate rape. And I went out on campus to try to stop this and to say, what's going on here? Which was a very entertaining year of my life, because of course the activists went bananas trying to stop me. And at Sydney University, they had to get the riot squad in to protect me and because there were all these crazy students yelling and screaming and shoving my audience and not letting them get through to the venue. And we had to get the riot squad in to remove those mad kids so that my lecture could go ahead. And actually this was an amazing thing, because I don't know whether you heard, the Dan Tehan had newly been just appointed as education minister, and he set up an inquiry into free speech on campus, and that led to new legislation to try to ensure proper open discussion at our university. And that was all due to me. I was pretty excited, but then no one ever acknowledges it started off with me. Anyway, that was the beginning. I went out on campuses trying to expose this. And there was one particular woman, her name is Nina Fennell, who was an end rape on campus activist. She was one of the people involved in setting up these kangaroo courts. And she wrote, like, in over a 2-year period, she wrote a dozen articles defaming me, promoting all sorts of crap about me. You know, she'd taken, I mean, I've got a nearly 50-year media career. She took bits and pieces from my videos and chopped them up and made me look as horrible and stupid as possible. She took articles I'd written and took quotes totally out of context. And she bundled this all together and wrote articles defaming me. We had this little legal skirmish where she threatened to sue. I said she was telling lies about me. Anyway, so it went on. And then the big mistake in my life was 2 years ago, I got an Australia Day honour from the government, awarding me for service to the community, including promoting gender equity through advocacy for men. Yep. And that was like a red flag to the bull. And within hours, Nina Fennell had written an article saying, Rosie Batty wanted my award rescinded. You know, it was outrageous that someone like me had been given this award. She lined up, she had 2 attorney general condemn me. She lined up, I mean, we were going out one night and there was the ABC running an item about someone denouncing me as their major news item. all weekend long, they had this, they ran this idea of, you know, this pile on me. And it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. It was absolutely ghastly. And then the wonderful thing is along came COVID, and COVID saved me, because when COVID came along, they couldn't, you know, devote the whole of the ABC to attacking Bettina Arndt, could they? They had to get on to more serious business. And so I must have been the only person in Australia who was really relieved when COVID came along, because it, you know, it gave me a bit of relief. But I've been cancelled in Australia, and none of mainstream media touches me anymore because of the activities of these feminists who utterly demolish my reputation. They've captured my Wikipedia page. They won't let anybody edit it. It's full of ridiculous slurs against me, misrepresenting what I've said, lying about what I've said, and you can't get near it. I mean, that's what happens when someone gets cancelled.
So basically what I'm hearing is this. So you started off as a woman being interested in women's issues, fair enough too, and considering those times. I was born in 71, so about the time that you started listening to you talk, around about the time you started getting really active. You started to get a serious degree of empathy for what's going on here. You presented facts as best as you saw them and got punished for presenting facts. Like,
but the point is, I had this huge following, and they knew it. I mean, the reason I was taken out was I was so dangerous. I was over the target. They wouldn't have bothered, would they? They wouldn't have bothered to wheel out all these heavies.
Yeah, if it was Matt Maloney saying stuff on, like, not that Northern Vibe is nothing, because like we're kind of growing actually, and it's really cool. But good. Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I take it as a tribute.
Yeah,
they rolled out the big guns to take me out, because it shows I was really getting someone they're worried about me, because I've been exposing the lies of feminism for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a domestic violence industry, which is consistently telling lies about what's happening in violent relationships. Look at the Depp, you know, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, which of course the judgment came out in the last 24 hours, absolutely showing that woman was lying. And that jury saw that. She was caught out absolutely exposed as the violent person in that relationship. You know, they played the tape showing her sneering at Johnny, saying, you know, go along and tell them I was violent towards you, as if anyone would believe that. That's the culture we're living in, where male victims of violence are not believed. You used to be a policeman, Matt, do you say?
Yeah, look, I can, there's only can feel, although I'm out of the service now, but short answer, everything you said is totally spot on. To give some degree, to give you some understanding of my experience really briefly, I had a 30-year career. Almost all of it was operational, disproportionately in uniform. I did a short stint in plain clothes in what was then called the Juvenile Aid Bureau. So we dealt with children both as victims and as offenders. My thing was juvenile justice. So I was dealing disproportionately with kids who were offending, but like if a job came in, we had to do it. And yes, I wasn't a specific sexual abuse investigator. It would be an exaggeration to say that was my thing, but because that wasn't my specific ambit. But I did quite a few sexual abuse investigations. I've jailed people.
But if you were dealing with these troubled families, the major people who abuse children are in fact women. And in our society, we never talk about that. We talk about domestic violence. So we talk about abuse against children by mothers. And look, that's a total taboo.
And look, you know, we're both going to get really excited about this. So we need to like.
That's all right. I'm happy to be excited. We should be excited about this, man. Yeah. I mean, it matters that children are growing up cowering from their mothers, and they're not allowed to talk about it. You know, remember when we first discovered how prevalent sexual abuse of children was?
Yeah.
And our society was really ashamed because we realized we didn't believe children when they came to us and said, you know, dad was sexually abusing them or whatever. Now we are not believing children when they say it's mum I'm afraid of. We're pretending that doesn't exist.
Before I say what this is, I've got to say what it isn't. Like, you can trust the police generally in Queensland. Well, at least when I was there, like I've been out for 2 years, so I can't, you know, I don't know if the dynamics have changed. But, you know, we investigated stuff thoroughly. But there were still cases that I personally know of and was involved in. Like, I know of a case where a guy was arrested and charged and actually was in jail on remand for a case that we subsequently found before it actually went to hearing, thank God. But he was in the bin, he was in jail and had been in there for some time. And the detective involved was a very competent, very capable, very empathetic, decent chap, was doing his job, doing his due diligence, going through stuff, made a few phone calls. Long story short, he found out that it just wasn't true. Like, it wasn't true.
You say we can trust the police. I've done 2 YouTube videos with police officers who've come to me because they're so ashamed of what they're required to do, which is to believe the victims.
Yes, that's true.
You know, they're required, if a woman says, they don't even have to say, this man has been violent to me. They can say, I'm afraid he could be violent to me. And they have to remove men from the house.
Yeah, that's with DV. That's a separate thing.
Yeah.
On that, you are absolutely true. One of my big concerns about DV, and like, I don't just have lots, and when I say lots of operational experience in dealing with DV, I was actually on the domestic violence high risk team as well. And I actually, and I'm going to come out and say this, it was it was bothering me ethically being on that group, because when I kind of said, aren't we dealing with domestic violence? It's no. Domestic violence equals men's violence. We're dealing with men's violence. And I'm like, well, okay. Like, in my experience, because I'm a little bit familiar with some of the literature on this, not as familiar with you, but my experience told me this: men are much more likely to be physically violent. So but hang on, no, hear me out. But when it comes to defining violence, as in like picking on men and you know, picking on people and attacking people's self-image, attacking people's you know, insulting them and attacking their what people think of them, which is what happened to you. Women are just as bad. So the aggression levels are equal. The expression of the aggression is disproportionately violent with males. But when it comes to actually, and again, this is just my experience, okay? And I want you to talk after this. But the expression of women's violence was really, really different because they simply don't have the upper body strength. They just can't win the fight. They're not that dumb that they're going to go in there and punch a man.
Well, look at Jessica Heard, Amber Heard.
Yeah.
I mean, she slapped him. And we see that every day in, comedies, on the street.
Okay, well,
it's not regarded as physical violence, is it?
Well, and here's the other thing. Look, that is the point. Look,
yeah. That there was a big study involving experts from right across America and other countries as well.
I need you to send me that study.
1,700 peer-reviewed studies, and they find that women are just as likely to instigate violence as men are in violent relationships. But we're talking about the slap. We're talking about women are less likely, obviously, to kill because of as you say, it's the physical strength determines how likely it is that the person will be severely injured and killed, of course, too. And a woman is more likely to be killed in a violent relationship than a man is. And yet women are just as likely as men to instigate, or more likely than men to instigate violence. And that's what the research has been consistently showing for 40 years. They won't let us talk about that.
But we were specifically trained, and I can tell you this, Tina, the training, look, initially it started off like this. It's like, just go in, do your job, doesn't matter who they are, fear or favor, malice or will, sort it out. But there has been a distinct undermining of the police oath, which matters a lot to me, incidentally, because that articulates the values and the conceptual framework of the way policing should work. But the training then started saying, because they weren't getting the results they wanted, early in the piece, it was really funny. It started to even out when it came to DV, when it came to DV applications, especially when domestic violence was defined not just as hitting people. It started to even out, and they didn't like the results. So we specifically had people come in and train. I'm not making this up, and I'll stand by this. We specifically had people come in and train us and go, look, this change your conceptual framework and view things through the issue of power dynamics. So it might be the case that a woman is slapping someone or picking on a man or engaging in what you would define as domestic violence, but you need to reframe it and understand that there is a power dynamic in between that man and that woman. The man is more powerful, the woman is not. Therefore, what she did is an understandable response to a terrible power imbalance. She's just trying to right the wrong and balance the scale, whereas he is just abusing his power. So once they introduced this idea of power dynamics, and they train the police to do that, and that's what they do, and that started to bother me too. I was writing off a lot of DV files. What I'm doing is I'm viewing things through the conceptual framework of the way that when I was sworn in 1991, and the promise, and I know this sounds odd, but the promise I made to God to uphold Her Majesty's peace and to serve my community through that. Now, people laugh at that nowadays, like God, Queen, country. Those things are punchlines, but that's not why I joined the police. And it troubled me that conceptual framework has been changed. So the police now, and here's why you can still trust them, and I stand by my comment before, they're doing what they're told to do. They're doing what they're told to do.
But they're being told to enforce unjust laws. I think that is
but that's not their fault. That's not their fault.
No, it's not their fault. No. And they write to me all the time saying, this is not on. We're unhappy about being required to do this. I know a guy who's doing some research with police on domestic violence, and he found 4 separate cases where the police had gone into the home, determined, in fact, that the woman was the one who'd been violent, written that up accordingly, gone before magistrates who'd refused to believe them. And that magistrate had charged the man. I mean, we have a system which is stacked against men all the way along the line. And now we've got this new coercive control legislation which is really dangerous, bringing in all this psychological abuse. You know, in America, in Britain,
I really want to jump in on this. It's going to be good. And here's why. I've thought about this a lot, Tina. Thought about this a lot. Because it's going to expose what I said before. It's not so much about the violence, it's about its expression.
No, listen, Matt. In Britain, this legislation was introduced, I think, about 4 years ago, and it was supposed to be gender neutral, applied to both sexes. Within, I think the last figures I saw about 2 years ago, 98% of people being charged were male. And police say to me all the time, if I go in and determine that she was the one goading him and being violent towards him, I mean, being emotionally violent towards him, you know, I won't get this through. Nothing's going to happen to it. There was a huge international study run, about 2 years ago, where they asked people all over the world whether they'd ever been victims of coercive control, and they were particularly focusing on men. And they got almost 1,000 men from Australia, filled that in, gave example after example of living in relationships where they were totally, constantly goaded and manipulated emotionally by women. One of the classic things women say, you know, if you don't do what I say, I will leave you and take the children. Yeah. You know, what do you do with that? That's just out there all the time. And men know if she decides to leave, they lose everything. It's very easy for a woman to keep the kids away from the man if they don't want.
And that's it. And the courts are open about that.
So, I mean, you're kidding yourself, man, if you think that coercive control legislation isn't a weapon against men.
See,
now, good police out there. I'm not saying police are bad.
No.
I'm saying they no longer have any control. There was a really important lecture last year from this woman called Margaret Caneen, who's one of our top Sydney barristers. She's a Silk QC. She used to be a prosecutor, public prosecutor, Crown prosecutor, and she put away a lot of our really big rape cases 20 years ago. She had a reputation for being, you know, really, and she ran a big inquiry into sexual abuse against kids. She was on the other side, you know, really out to get bad guys. Yeah. And she's now working. She's left the prosecutor. She's no longer working as a prosecutor. She's working as a barrister, mainly defending men now. She made the point the other day that what's happened in the last few years is believe the victim justice has totally taken control of our justice system. And police and prosecutors no longer have a filtering system. They're allowed to say there's no evidence for their sexual assault case. They're required to put them all through to court, and they end up in front of juries, and a lot of them are still being thrown out. Almost all her cases are falling down in court. And then the feminists turn around and say, look, our justice system is failing these. I know. The case, look at my YouTube videos. Look at the sort of cases that are ending up there. I'm constantly, I've got a group of lawyers helping with these university cases. Kids at university being accused of ridiculous crimes, which then get thrown out in magistrate courts 2 years later. When I've got lawyers who would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars defending these kids, and the magistrates' courts, the juries end up throwing them out, but they've destroyed the lives of these young men. It's just incredible what's going on here.
I explained, we had to explain due process to DVHRT, and they would constantly throw that at me and go, and it's used in so many other ways. It's like, look, the courts are saying no, that means the courts are wrong. And I go, no. And they said, you have to believe all women. And I go, let me explain the purpose of due process. The reason we have due process is because human beings lie, male, female, black, white, atheist, believer, whatever it is. Human beings lie, and they try and use authority to fight their own battles. The reason the coercive power that the state has, the police and everything else, is huge. So you need due process. Now, when you say believe all victims, what you're saying is no due process.
No, we
Not
don't have due,
understand
we
that?
don't have due process anymore. I did a video last week with a mother whose son was accused of sexual assault of a kid this kid he'd been babysitting.
Yeah.
And it was a crazy situation. This took years to go through to end up resolved in the court. And what had happened is the kid he'd been babysitting and he'd been looking after since she was in nappies, a 2-year-old. So he changed her nappies and so on. And he's looking after her one night and she's itchy and she's, scratching herself down there, scratching her vulva. And he goes in and he gets a baby wipe and gives a wipe with the baby, that, hoping that would soothe her just once. Next day, she said something to her mother saying that this man had licked her. And the mother has a total meltdown, says, don't say anything, calls Danny and gets the video camera, starts cross-examining this kid. Instead of bringing this man that they've known for years and years in to say, what was this all about? They called the police. The police embarked on, this poor little child, 5-year-old child, went through internal examinations, cross-examinations by the police, you name it. And it's now, I think, 4 years later, a judge determined that she emphatically believed this man's story, and it all made sense, and it had all been a huge mistake.
Yeah, and imagine that. You think of what that poor chap has gone through. That's
unbelievable. He was called a pedo. He was on the front page of newspapers. I mean, he was told he should go and hang himself. I could give you case after case, Matt. There's a Queensland case of a kid who got totally pissed on his 18th birthday, ends up waking up in the apartment of a girl he vaguely knew. So he wakes up in this woman's flat, goes home, doesn't think anything of it, goes home. Next thing, the police are knocking on his door saying she's been accused of rape. This case also took years. He ended up, he reached, until they could get him bail, this 18-year-old was in prison. It turned out the police had DNA evidence that she had the DNA of 2 other men in her vagina that night, and not this kid, nothing from this kid on her body. And they sat on that evidence for a year, and it could have exonerated this boy. Amazing thing. And so this court case, this is one of my cases I've got this website called Mothers of Sons.
Was that in Queensland?
In Queensland. And so this court case came out. The woman, the girl, the accuser is in court. All her lies unraveled. When that young man walked out of that court with his family, the jury stood there applauding him, and they went and gave him big hugs. They were obviously so upset at what the police and what the prosecutors had done to him. I could give you dozens of these cases.
Wow. And
our justice system has been absolutely hijacked by I believe the women justice.
I explained due process works on the idea that the person is lying and we need to prove it. If we can prove it, and I believe, it's a flawed system. Because you think of what the golden thread is. It's better to let 100 guilty men walk free than one innocent person to be put in. That's true. But it works on the idea is, and it took me years to get my head around this as a junior constable. Because, murder is, and I still believe murder is much worse than pedophilia, despite, I've had people go, it's worse. I go, no, it's not. Really, no. I'd hate to be raped, but I'd rather be raped than killed. At least I can get, I'm still alive.
I totally agree with you, but you're not allowed to say that anymore.
No, but I've had people disagree with me on that and go you're morally flawed for saying that. I'm going, are you serious? Are you serious? Are you just?
But think about that. That's really drives me crazy too. This idea that sexual abuse is worse than any other crime towards children, for instance.
Yeah.
What? It's worse than beating a child half to death. It's worse than starving a child. It's worse. I mean, what is it about sex that is obsessing this culture?
Yeah.
Why do we treat a touch on the arm of a little child, or, you know, a little girl being forced, you know, looking at her uncle's penis? Why do we treat that as worse than, you know, years of physical abuse? It's madness. Feminism has been a big part of it. I mean,
how so? I want you to discuss that.
Oh, well, interestingly, Janice Fiamengo has written a lot about this, or talked a lot about this too. The suffragettes, you know, the original first wave feminists, had a slogan: votes for women, chastity for men. And a lot of their initial, you know, there's always been this thread of feminism, which is about reining men in, a reaction against male sexuality. They find the idea of male libido really offensive. And that we've seen that all the way through, you know, the 20th century feminism too, was the anti-pornography, anti, you know, the whole girl Playboy, whatever it was. There's been whale lust is disgusting. You know, it goes on and on and on. And part of that, we've had this peculiar alliance between, you know, very religious, puritanical people and the feminists in trying to, you know, in trying to say sex is bad. You know, we have to be careful, and elevating sexual crimes to be something infinitely worse than anything else. And I've never really understood that.
China does not have, like, don't get me wrong, I mean, they like shagging as much as anyone else, but they don't have this cultural weird obsession with sex that we've taken to this really strange degree with food, which is kind of cool. I mean, that's why the food is so good, and why they're now getting this, because they've always been a skinny people, but now they're just getting.
Yeah, but I just want to tell people, I'm now writing on Substack. I have a blog. So if people go on my website, they'll see the link. So just Google my name. You'll put that up there somewhere. Will you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they go to my website. They can see the link to Substack. And I'm doing blogs every couple of weeks, writing about all the issues that no one else is talking about. So I'd love to get some more followers for that. And I'm on YouTube, making videos occasionally about, particularly with some of my young men who have been persecuted by our universities. And I think it's really important people see those.